Hello, it's March 11th, 2017. I'm Tony Smario, coming to you from my father, BroSal.org YouTube channel. And I want to give you a quick update on our march toward World War III this week. I want to start by pointing out an article that I just found. Because of the way it was presented, I saw the words in my mailbox. It said, "Time for peace with the Palestinians." And so when I followed it up, it leads me to this, I guess you can call it an article. I don't even know if it's 500 words. I mean, it's really, it demonstrates to me two of the major points that I'm always trying to draw people's attention to. One is the centrality of Israel and the Palestinian issue, the peace and safety that we're expecting to be said concerning Israel before they go to war, and the way the media is, it's not even fair to call it a farce. Or a masquerade. It's a propaganda machine. It's a absolutely on purpose machine where, nearly every piece of programming that comes over our media, it's coming from some thought as to what gap it's filling, excuse me, in our perception of reality, the way they want us to perceive it, so that even if it seems meaningless or senseless, it's only filling that gap of meaningless and senseless material. But you can bet it's carefully screened. Everything is carefully measured. And so this ridiculous little bit of, you decide for yourself. It'll only take us 2 minutes to read it. The Washington Times, it's from yesterday, March 10th, 2017, from somebody named Dave Boyer. Friday, March 10th, 2017, Washington Times, headline, "Trump tells Abbas, quote, 'Time has come for peace deal with Israel.' President Trump told Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas Friday that it's time for a comprehensive agreement to end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The president emphasized his personal belief that peace is possible and that the time has come to make a deal, the White House said in a readout of the phone conversation between the two leaders. The president noted that such a deal would not only give Israelis and Palestinians the peace and security they deserve, but that it would reverberate positively throughout the region and the world. Mr. Trump invited Mr. Abbas to a meeting at the White House soon. The president, quote, underscored that such a peace agreement must be negotiated directly between the two parties and that the United States will work closely with Palestinian and Israeli leadership to make progress toward that goal, unquote, the White House said. The president noted that the United States cannot impose a solution on the Israelis and Palestinians, nor can one side impose an agreement on the other, the statement said. Abbas' spokesman said, quote, Abbas stressed the commitment to peace as a strategic choice to establish a Palestinian state alongside the state of Israel, unquote, according to the official Palestinian Wafa news agency. Palestinians are concerned at the more favorable approach shown by Washington towards Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu since Mr. Trump came to power, Mr. Netanyahu and Mr. Trump have spoken on the phone at least twice since the inauguration, and Mr. Netanyahu visited Washington last month. Palestinian officials indicated Abbas would emphasize his concern about Israeli settlement building on occupied land and the need for a two-state solution to the conflict. Period. This article is based on Wire Service reports. So here's your little synopsis based on the Wire Service reports that, as a headline announced, Trump tells Abbas time's come for peace with Israel. What I'm wondering if you caught, that I caught as I read it, is other than the fact that Trump has said it, I don't see what's changed. President Trump told Palestinian Authority President Abbas Friday that it's time for a comprehensive agreement to end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Well, I mean, the world's been saying that since at least Clinton, right? It's time. It's time. It's time. I mean, Carter started it all, but at Clinton, you know, the peace process and the two-basket plan and all the things that have been going on for most of my life even, but for quite a couple of decades now in this process, I don't see, you know, what's changed. Trump told Abbas, okay, it's time to make a deal. Oh, that's great. Trump, the president, emphasized his personal belief that peace is possible and that the time has come to make a deal. Well, that's nothing new either, right? And the same thing Clinton said back in his day. And the president noted that such a deal would not only give Israelis and Palestinians the peace and security they deserve, but that it would reverberate positively throughout the region and the world. You know, again, no news here, except that in this world of programming and complete psychological domination through the media and through all of the electronic communication devices, what I read here is, you know, like I said, there's nothing new here except they're announcing it again through Trump. We've been anticipating that this, you know, a Trump presidency anticipates getting closer to this building the temple again, which is going to bring the peace. I mean, is it really a coincidence that 2,000 years ago, Paul said, when they say peace and safety, sudden destruction comes? I mean, that's a prophecy like Nostradamus. How could he know? He's not saying, I think that he's pointing out that this is what he's seen. That the time comes when these enemies say peace and safety, and that's when the sudden destruction comes. So here we are, you know, in quotes, they deserve the peace and security, and it would reverberate positively throughout the region and the world, which is, of course, what we've been anticipating eschatologically is what brings the world into that final battle when the peace is broken, and why they resist what's prophesied as these final two witnesses, which will certainly be seen as terrorists, you know, sponsored by Iran, no doubt, to denounce this new temple and this Messiah and all who call this miracle working, you know, person that is come to point the finger at this new temple and say, this is where we're going to all worship. We're not going to slaughter bulls anymore for Jehovah, and we're not going to wait for Jesus. We're all going to worship like this. At least that's the way it seems to read in the eschatological view. And when you look at the world with this hype over the movement of the embassy to Jerusalem and this everything that's gone on with the whole Temple Institute and the public instigation of all this for some time now, you know, the upside for them, this is what I want you to see, that I saw when I read this, the reverberation positively throughout the region and the world. They get to have this moment when everybody's at peace. And whatever that portends for I say their war is already planned. They're not reacting. Oh boy, okay, well let's have peace. No, the peace is to set up the war. I'm writing another article right now, hopefully for Veterans Today. We'll see if it gets published. But I'm writing an article about the fact that what most of the world's not expecting right now is that all this talk and hype about war and hostilities and danger and Russian aggression and Iran, North Korea, that's all going to give way to an equally sensational talk about peace, I think. That's why it's being set up with all the talk about war. Since when do you do so much talking, if you're going to war? Since when do you... everything they do seems to be just the opposite of what you would do if you had real terrorists to confront. Why would you give them your airwaves? Why would you scare your people? Especially when they're not really accomplishing much. A lone gun terrorist, you don't even have to show that on TV. And if you do, you can say, police are unsure. No one's claimed responsibility. Wouldn't that drive you crazy as the terrorists sending the lone gun nutman out, knowing that every time you are able to pull off some lone gun cell attack, the world blames it on someone else and you don't even get credit? Your cause doesn't even get heard? That's what you do with terrorists. Technically, by the book, you don't scare everybody. Watch out. We can't stop them. We're never going to stop them. Oh, this is forever. They're taking over. Watch out, watch out, watch out. You don't do that. Even if you think that way, you don't do that. So it shows that the threat isn't really real. And I say the peace isn't really real. That's why they're starting to work, though, the words in about the peace again. The peace, it's always been a peace process. And as I say, what's Trump bringing to the table? His own skills as a negotiator? He's just underscored that it's got to be between the two parties. When he says the United States will work closely with Palestinian and Israeli leadership to make progress toward that goal, what do we think? Trump's going to sit in there and, okay, you guys, come on, let me hear it. Here's what I want to do. That's all it's really took all this time. Why didn't we get Trump to negotiate it when Clinton was in office? So I don't buy that narrative that it takes Trump and Trump's personal belief to make this happen. The people that have been negotiating this for 30 years, as you can see, it's all still the same issues. Palestinians say, hey, we need our own state, and the settlements, right? All the same issues. Nothing's changed. The settlement building on occupied land, two-state solution. All the same sticking points are exactly the same now as they were long before Trump got involved. So I say it's that you can read the fact that this war cry is going to give way to the peace cry. That's what's really going to happen. That's why all the war talk is going to have everybody standing on their head, especially all the conspiracy theorists, all these Christian sites that keep calling for the end times. Obama was the Antichrist. Now I guess Trump's the Antichrist. The Pope's always the Antichrist. As if they've never actually read it and don't even understand the basic tenets of the story. The Antichrist isn't the one who is against Jesus. It's the false deliverer of the Jews, which means there has to be a temple. Deliverer doesn't show up, no temple. Right? So that's why this push from the state to build a temple, because they got a Messiah in mind, I think. So they can move forward with God. Since they've got the Christians behind them, God has done this, right? God's brought God's people back. And it's the state of Israel's, secular state position that they're God's people, right? They're the only secular state that relies on the fact of being a theocracy. They're God's people that are back. They're waiting for their Messiah to return. They're obligated to try and rebuild their temple. So that's what's going on, and they've got the Christians behind it all. So this is the crazy, triangle. And then in that triangle, of course, is Islam, who believes Jesus is the Messiah. So crazy as it all sounds, you somehow have the Christians hating Islam and friends with the Zionists. But this is what I see as the real nature of the hostilities that nobody talks about. The people involved over there think that they're waiting for, their narrative is one of a temple, God's people, the Messiah is going to come back. Even all their politics, nobody can get by in the state of Israel politically or otherwise without towing that narrative. Say, well, we're not really God's people, but, we like to play at that ritual. No, you're God's people. That's how you, come on, that's what makes the, so to pretend that part of the state of Israel is not going to become the thorn in the side, God's people. Well, what do we do when God sends his Messiah to God's people after God rebuilds the temple? Now that God's brought his people back to the land. Then what's the world going to do but worship God's people forever, according to the prophecy? So, what if somebody's got the military might to make that happen? Just like they have so far. These are God's people. And by the will of God, they're going to build that temple again and wait for their Messiah. And if by the will of God the Messiah shows up, well then, who can make war with him? As the world is bound to say, according to, what we saw in Revelation. But I just want to tie that into this story here that, here you are, Trump, time for peace. Why does Trump make a difference if it's not just time for peace, period? That they've been moving towards a phase of this. And the next phase before war is peace. Well, now, why do you have to have the peace before the war? I think it's because the war is meant to be so destructive and devastating, so thorough, so final, that it takes a division that's absolute. And to get that, you need the sort of, emotional attachment or emotional devastation that comes with the breaking of a covenant. Think how does a person feel when their spouse, cheats on them, lies to them, right? How do you feel when the person you've had a child with runs off and calls the authorities and won't ever, doesn't ever want you to see that child again, right? So the emotion that's attached to the breaking of this peace covenant, which again, I believe the reason that we're going through all the hysteria of war right now and the rattling of war sabers and the beating of war drums and the threat by seemingly innocuous parties like North Korea. I never heard of it my whole life. I never knew North Korea. And again, we talked about it. You go back in the history. They gave North Korea to Russia after World War II as part of this division for, I think, why else? But the planned world, someday, let's just say after World War II, somebody knew that someday we need to have another war, that this isn't enough. This got us to point B. But we already know that someday we're going to need another war. And even if we don't need another great war, the think tanks have already pointed out that only through the constant threat of war can any one particular authority ever hope to maintain their power. You can't stay in power in a peaceful world. People might just peacefully opt to follow somebody else. So what the think tanks determine is only if your population that's currently following you is somehow threatened mortally by war, by imminent danger. The sky is falling, a meteor's coming, right? Global warming. The boogeyman is coming to get you. Aliens are on an invasion. If that's happening, well, then your population will blindly follow you into nearly any situation that you create in the sense of being played against, the worst situation of being caught by the terrorists or the aliens or whatever the scare happens to be. And so I think that's what the War of the Worlds was at the time. They were trying on the alien threat to see how scared through the radio could they make people of aliens if they needed to, to use that threat. And I think because it was so successive, it bred an industry where they've played out a narrative that's played both sides. Oh, aliens are a hoax. Aliens aren't real. But that's played against something that looks very top secret. Like the military knows all about it. Like there's really something to this alien thing. And then now in our day, NASA comes out and they're anticipating contact with other life forms. They've already identified planets that have the potential for other life forms. So they're keeping alive the possible alien fear, whether it ever does amount to anything or not. But in the reality of what's played out over this last 100 years, it's been 2 wars for what appears to be taking over Palestine. That land that, that contested land for the longest time. Remember, the Muslims have taken it twice. They've taken it and lost it twice. And so it makes some sense, I guess is what I'm trying to say, that from a standpoint of running the world, that does appear, once you've subdued the Asian race, as the only other substantial hegemonic enemy. And when you look at what's gone on the last 100 years, it seems pretty easy to follow that narrative that, in fact, they have been divided up, they've been backstabbed, they've been pitted against each other, they've been turned into puppet regimes. They've certainly, we've used that territory to establish this nation of Israel. And what appears to be even bigger, since they talk about it out in the open, is this Greater Israel Project, to literally feel that, hey, God promised them all this land. It's all going to be theirs. So in somebody's playbook, it seems like that's what they're playing out. And in that playbook, a third world war is required, because all these Arabs, all these Shias, all these Persians and these peoples that you're never gonna conquer them. You have to wipe them out. And since you're riding on this God's people, God's bringing his people. Hey, Rothschilds and his group, the Zionists at that time. Hey, we're Jews. Hey, God says he's going to bring us back one day when our hearts turn back to him. Hey, my heart's back with God. I happen to have all the money. I want to get Palestine back. So even if you put it in that kind of narrative, you're still talking about this, waiting on God, waiting on a Messiah, wanting to rebuild a temple as the state of Israel's main focus of existence. It isn't just to upset their Arab neighbors. It isn't just to build a nuclear arsenal. It isn't just to, I don't know where they get the money to influence American politics, if it's, if they're not one and the same entity. How's Israel support itself and all the nuclear weapons and pay off all the American politicians to keep America running in their favor, regardless of the world's views? So the whole thing seems to be just one big, America's nothing more than set up to be an army to secure this Palestinian land and eventually, war with all those Arabs. But to get that to, I suppose, to set that off in order to see it through to that conclusion that's been predetermined. You can't just accuse them of blowing up the World Trade Center, right? I mean, look, they tried to get all that started years earlier. Oklahoma City bombing after the World Trade Center, terrorism. But homegrown, people didn't make a big deal. We weren't afraid enough of simple terrorism yet. So but I believe all these things were just to measure the public's reaction, and to instill their narrative. Nothing was, what do we do tomorrow? Oh, let's blow up the Oklahoma City, oh, I don't know, what should we do? They're working the narrative at which whatever gauges they're using to feel the resistance by whoever they're worried about, which must be the massive population. Who else could turn against you and stop you, really? So you're feeling the way that your psychological battle is going to win the population over to be their own slaves, to get in debt to slavery, to give up all their rights, to to deregulate and let, to actually watch their own demise and not resist it. And you notice that when you push a little too far here or there, you get blowback, resistance, like the pipeline access with all these Native Americans. But I believe all that's measured. They know that there's just not enough Native Americans to make a difference, but it's a nice distraction right now while you're ultimately destroying a people you have no value for anyway. So in this 100-year plan, it seems to me it makes sense that a third world war is necessary to win over Palestine completely. In my narrative of getting back my land that God promised me and ruling it forever, ruling everyone forever with my heart now that's turned to God. So, even on the most straightforward concept of what the state of Israel is, even trying to give them all the benefit of the doubt of being a legitimate pursuit of this Zionism that's promised by God, you still got to figure that then they're going to fight another war with the Arabs because other people live on that land. They're not able to make, which brings me back around to what I got started with, this Palestinian issue. All these years, they're not able to accommodate these Palestinians whose land they keep encroaching on. These Palestinians who don't have a big military, they're not being confronted by a constant aggressor that has some sort of military parity that you're forced to be engaged with on that level and therefore look at as an equal. You're talking about people that are throwing rocks and launching the bombs that they can against a far superior enemy only because their cause, which practically everybody in the world, not just their Arab neighbors, but nearly every country in the world has gotten behind their cause to say that they have, they have a grievance that needs to be dealt with, and the state of Israel is not bothered to deal with it, which again to me seems quite intentional. If what you're trying to do is peacefully let God make you a blessing to all nations in that land, that doesn't seem to be the plan. And so when you look at just the way, the nuclear weapons program over there, something that, how many countries in the world get to just say, you don't get to look, no, you don't get to see, no, you don't get to know what we're doing. Yeah, we're in a very provocative area where if we get somehow our, too itchy and send off one of these nuclear weapons that we won't confirm, that you seem to know we have, but we won't tell you about it. And no, you can't look. And yeah, you know, why shouldn't the world be worried that, hey, you're Israel sitting in the middle of all these Arabs. It's not unthinkable that you could be engaged in such a clash that you would launch a nuclear weapon. Why wouldn't the world have a right? If we got a right to look into Iran's program, if we got a right to look into Iraq's program, if we got a right to look into North Korea's program, anyone else, you know, call Russia to the task and take them to, you know, some sort of international arbitration to discuss nuclear proliferation. You know, but Israel just, I mean, isn't it odd? I mean, it's kind of odd. It's like these places like the Vatican or the District of Columbia, you know, these banking centers like the Cayman Islands, or, you know, these places that sort of are outside the jurisdiction of the people of the world. They're their own place that does their own thing, their own way, and nobody gets to object. And it's interesting that Israel has these sort of concessions with things like their nuclear program, where the IAEA, you know, which all these other countries have to abide that inspection and that probing, not Israel. So the World War III that's coming certainly has got to be centered on, you know, they're bringing Russia in and all this talk about nuclear weapons, but there's nothing really to fight about there on the scale of a world war. Why would the world go to war? What's Russia going to do that's going to bring the U.S. and Russia to war? And why would that bring in, say, Germany or China? Why wouldn't they try and arbitrate that war? What kind of instance could bring everybody in to a war, even if it wasn't at the exact same moment, but that could stimulate a domino effect that could bring everybody in? So when you talk about the Zion, you know, when you look at, say, the supposed Pike prediction of a Zionist Arab war, especially after a peace deal was made, because the people that signed on to the peace deal would then be locked in to defending it, right? So if the peace deal's broken, now you've got the reason that everybody on each side that was securing that peace and safety now has sudden destruction. Whoa, what do you mean you broke the deal? You know, now we have to go to war. And because, you know, Russia and China and Iran are all signed on to back a certain part of it, or they get, you know, I don't want to presume at this point. I want to let it happen. It seems to me that people like Iran will come in later in the game. Russia and China will be people who are, you know, China will be drawn in because of these associations. But the first dominoes to fall will have to do with this new temple, this new Messiah, and something that comes from something that stimulates a war with Islam over it. Some breaking of this treaty that allows them to rebuild the temple there is what seems to make sense. And now they go to war, and that drags in the countries affiliated, which due to the consequent events of that, economic sanction, whatever it is, that now doesn't leave anybody out. It drags everybody into the conflict. And so I say that only something so egregious as breaking such a long-awaited peace deal that kept everybody from the brink of going to war, right? And that's why they're presenting us with the brink of going to war now in places that don't make any sense. and from quarters that don't make any sense, like North Korea, or that have to be, artificially stimulated. China has to be provoked into military actions because if you look at the history of it, they're all the deals that were made after World War II to turn them into an industrial nation with the few ruling families. It's like America. The people don't get any of that. The people don't see any of that. They're fodder. But China, as far as the people pulling the strings and calling the shots, they're in bed with the people of America that industrialize that country and have to gain from war. They're going to be the winners that come out when, 100 million of their people die in battle. So it's giving the world a reason, I think. And that's why right now they're setting it all up. They're setting up the hostilities, but those can't lead directly to war, I don't believe. I believe that these are there to make the peace that much more a lever in the eventual push. Because remember, according to the prophecy of Daniel, it's in the middle of the 7-year covenant, so it's only 3.5 years that the peace lasts. But when you think of our world today, how much rhetoric and propaganda goes on in 3.5 years. I mean, look what we've been facing for a year of Donald Trump. Donald Trump for a year. Imagine 3.5 years of the temple being rebuilt, peace with the Palestinians after all these years, peace in the Arab world. We're rooting out the last vestiges of this Islamic State and these radicals, and there's nothing but peace in the future. Peace. We've made peace. There's, everybody's economies can start coming back because we're not going to have to be warring. This could be the narrative now for 3.5 years so that, whatever threat, if you now can accuse the other side, hey, you broke that, are you kidding? You've got a reason now. Wait a minute. That's, I say it'll be something like that. It'll send the world out of their minds that this peace is broken and each side blaming the other with nothing left to do but, go to war to defend the peace again. But this time, it's like that last man standing. Okay, there's no other way. You guys just won't have peace. You're determined to wipe us out. And so it's a fight to the finish, which I say, if you don't see that as the most likely eventuality, that the people who make all the guns and have had all the power since World War II have been making all the treaties with China, with Japan, with Germany, all over the world, setting up their little private islands and places like Basel, Switzerland, another one of these places that isn't really under the jurisdiction of Switzerland. It's just under the jurisdiction of the international bankers. Isn't that interesting? So when you consider what's been going on for quite some time, it's very hard to imagine that they're just accidentally wound up with hostilities all over the world and enough weaponry to wipe out hundreds of millions of people. I think that's the goal, but to sell it right, to do it right, to blame the religions and therefore be able to wipe up the religions afterward and forever. They have to make it this religious crux of the battle, the temple, the breaking of the peace deal, and now these sort of religious scourges can be wiped off the face of the earth in the name of this eternal kingdom that these people are, planning to set up on the other side of the Great War. And I mean, I just think that's the most plausible explanation of the facts. And anyway, I appreciate the comments, and I hope that people that disagree or have things to add will certainly let me know, because I keep learning from the people, and it sets me off on different research projects when I hear certain comments. So thanks for that. Thanks for being here. Please subscribe to our channel and share us, because as you can see, we're almost invisible in the world, and it keeps striking me as odd when I see all the channels that have so many subscribers. I mean, it's understandable with someone like James Corbett. He's out there 10 years, and he's really a valuable asset, and I can see why he's just grown and grown and grown. But there's so many that I come across, and they have tens of thousands of subscribers, and I think, how'd that happen? So I think in that way, I can't help but try and look at it in a positive light and feel, that we're a really special group, because we're not really nuts. I mean, I've been confirmed through people like James Corbett and a lot of, researchers over the years that have weight and stature that I don't have. And so I'm not saying I'm pulling together the strings that I've been introduced to and things I've learned from other people into a narrative that seems plausible to me, and especially related to the eschatological narrative that I'm aware of this whole end time, that I say religion has been purposely misinformed. And so they're out there constantly perpetuating myths and lies and outright misinformation. And so I see that we're a valuable source of some type of information, and it seems quite odd that, being as sort of unique a perspective as we really do have, that we don't have a little larger piece of that viewership that certainly is looking for our kind of information. So anyway, if you can share us, that's great. And but we do appreciate the ones that find us, and we'll keep bringing you the updates as often as we can. Talk to you soon.